Okay, so our next talk is with Florian and Hannes. They'll be talking about the practical guidance to AI security.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks for the introduction. Thanks for having us. We're also sorry that we have to talk about AI, but we kind of feel the need to do this. So Hannes and me are a little bit on a mission here, because if you look at what's been discussed concerning AI security, you're basically looking at two ends of the spectrum. One end is like you have very much academic approaches in thinking about AI security and what the problems are and how you can solve them. And then the other end of the spectrum is basically you tweets that just show you funny stuff on concerning generative AI. So we would like to kind of dump to you what we feel AI security should be, and it's actually not that complex if you look back at what you actually have at hand in dealing with IT security. So we will go through a technology overview, what we have been looking at and what we're talking about actually, and we are going to discuss a little bit the attack surface of those applications. So AI applications do have a considerable amount of attack surface, and it's also kind of a new attack surface in some terms. We're going to talk about that, and then we're going to talk about some design considerations. So you guys can, I don't know, clean up your head a little bit and dive into and judge what other people are saying and if this is crap or not. Disclaimer, most of it is crap. So I don't have to tell you all, you're the wrong audience to put this message out. I mean, the AI is everywhere, right? Everybody's doing AI. Probably most of your phones will have AI. Probably AI is listening to us right now through your phones. It's everywhere. Everybody's selling stuff with AI. And it seems to be that people like jump in on this also, obviously, as you can see from a perspective of laying off people. So there's also ethical considerations about AI. Ethical considerations we're not going to talk about because there's not enough time to tackle that. Also, privacy is another aspect that we're not going to talk about because, again, there's not enough time to talk about those things. We are going to focus on security. And if you look at why people are using AI, I think it's pretty obvious because people think it makes everything cheaper, everything better, and everything faster, right? That's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is people that highly dislike what's happening in AI right now. We are kind of in that terms at that end of the spectrum because there is so much bullshit out there. It's pretty ridiculous, to be honest, and we just really feel the need to bring everybody down, cool everybody down, and just give some advice on how you can deal with this magical new technology, right, that is coming up, and where are the problems, where are the real problems in there. So, talking about scoping, what are we talking about? We're talking about generative AI, and for our examples and the things that we're going to tell you and show you, and the problems that we're going to give you an impression, they're mostly in the openAI ecosystem, right? So we're talking about generative AI, and we're going to talk about GPTs and assistants, just as an example. Actually, you can apply all of the things that we're saying to any generative AI. There is no real reason, so it's not transferable to Claude or all of the other ones that are out there. But the openAI ecosystem is really good in showing where are the problems and what you can actually do and what you should not do. Yeah. So let's talk about the attack surface of AI applications because this gets mixed up a lot. So usually, I mean, you need to differentiate what is actually relevant for AI, what is AI, and what is like your usual application security, right? Because application security, we all know, it's fine, it works, right? So there's nothing to think about there, right? So there's nothing new there. So yeah, jokes aside, I mean, application security is there if you are going to implement a chatbot for your, I don't know, for your shop that is doing first level support or whatever. It is a web application at the end of the day, and of course you need to take care of the security of that web application. It's a no-brainer, right? But don't mix this up, so it's important to kind of look into these things and really distinguish what is new, what requires new measures, and what is actually stuff that we already understand and already know. And so that's nothing new, and the main focus is now what is new.
Yeah, and there have been some efforts to like organize this, and the one where we would like to use like as the starting point is like that LLM listing from OWASP. I mean, as you already know, OWASP puts out like lists for different topics in security and like rates them. I mean, this doesn't always make sense in a way. In this sense, it does make more sense than the web stuff in a way.
Hans, I think your mic is not working.
Oh yeah, that's louder. Louder is better.
Yes.
So we will start with the LLM stuff here. Yeah, and so if you look at this list, one thing that does something strike your mind when you look at it. I think the obvious thing is what Flo just hinted at, that a lot of that actually isn't really AI. So a lot of that is actually just other stuff. And so if we try to apply a filter, basically, on where to put AI and where not to put AI, you could end up with something like this, for example, where you say, okay, excessive agency of the AI itself, that's a pure AI topic, whereas training data poisoning actually sort of maybe isn't really in your hands, and then there's other things that really sort of aren't. Like insecure output handling.
Best example is supply chain vulnerabilities. Right?
Supply chain,
you have supply chain vulnerabilities. You have everywhere. It's not an AI thing to have supply chain vulnerabilities. You have this everywhere, right? It's nothing.
Yeah. So if you really break that down, then really there's the first distinction that you want to make is where does it actually start?
We didn't like go through the talk together and like kind of split up and know exactly who's going to talk about what. So it's going to be a little bit of a conversation maybe. So exactly. So those are the ones that we kind of got off the list because we thought that's actually, I mean, of course it's relevant to AI, but it's not specific for AI, right? So yeah, let's talk about assessing AI applications. And if you want to assess an application and kind of come up with an attack surface and judge, is the system, how do I need to secure it? Is it secure? Whatever. You're basically boiling down to a few things that are very, very specific to AI and very relevant from our side. And if you want to kind of understand the whole spectrum coming out of the OWASP top 10 that we just saw, then basically prompt injection is the technique to go, because that's the thing that we would say poses like a new risk that's in this sense not been there before. And the sensitive information disclosure, obviously also a thing that occurs everywhere, right? If you are able to extract some information out of a web application or whatever, because there's a stack trace or whatever, it's a sensitive information disclosure in that sense. AI applications also have this, but it's very special in terms of prompt. If you combine it with this prompt injection, or what you get out of those AIs is not necessarily, let's say, your typical secret. It's a little bit special. That's why we left it here. So the result out of this prompt injection is a sensitive information disclosure, and excessive agency is a general problem that we need to deal with AI. And if you sum this up and boil it down to those few things, basically the baseline is it's not rocket science, right? You'll have to deal with the new things, but it's not rocket science, and we're going to talk about why this is not rocket science. So let's talk about the anatomy a little bit of those LLM systems that we're going to take as an example. And there are basically two things that we're looking at. One is the GPTs. So that's basically your chatbots that you have in the openAI, cloud. You have your web application at openAI, and then you can go into a kind of an app store, and in that app store you have GPTs that you can use to perform special tasks. For example, there is an AI GPT that will help you answer questions for, I don't know, SAP, right? If you have very specific questions about how to maintain an SAP, an ERP system, you can just use that GPT, and it has like special knowledge about that. Then you have your assistants. Assistants are basically more tailored chatbots that you will be creating to implement them in your applications, right? So if you go to IKEA, for example, or also Bild.de, for example, then there will be some chatbots somewhere and you can just interact with them, talk to them, and they will take over like your usual first-level support or whatever. So assistants are more like a programmatic approach to implement generative AI capabilities in your own application, whereas GPTs are more like specialized generative AI applications hosted on the openAI App Store, so to say. And the very big problem with the approach on how you set up these things is that your setup is, or your configuration is done by a natural language. And this should, everybody who's into security, I guess there are a few in this room, this should raise a red flag, because configuration in natural language is completely insane, right? Usually what you want to do is, if you want to enable a security feature, then there is a flag for it and it tells you, this is true, that's it. And then it's there and it does its thing. If you want to prevent things from happening, you will now have to use natural language. And that's a big problem, because natural language was never kind of, very efficient or effective in preventing. You all talk to each other, right? And you all have people where talking to each other makes sense and where it doesn't, right? So so this is a big red flag.
Yeah, and in and of itself, you will always introduce something that puts uncertainty in there. Just in a way, you can draw a parallel to like law, right? Law is written in natural language, and all of a sudden you need lawyers and you need judges, and they may or may not come to an actual conclusion and be on
the same conclusion.
Yeah. And so there will always be some liberty in that.
So this is how you do it. So if you want to set up a GPT, you're basically starting a GPT, that is the GPT builder. So there is a GPT that you click on and you say, yeah, I want to create a GPT now in the openAI application, basically, in the web application. And it just asks you, hey, what do you like to do? What do you want to do? And then you just talk to the GPT builder to create you a GPT. And we did this in a very, very superficial example, just to show you how the process is, how everything works. And it's like the examples that we have there, like very, how do you say it? It's very verbose. They're not necessarily always aligned to is this realistic or not, but we just want to make a point, and this is why we set up our GPT like this. So what our GPT is trying to do is just calculate the sum of two numbers, nothing else, right? And it's right there, nothing else. And we told the GPT builder, this is the only thing that you do, you just calculate the sum of two numbers and that's it, don't do anything else. What you get is basically a preliminary configuration. In that configuration, you have your text, your instructions, and then you can add some capabilities like an image processor, and you all know what ChatGPT's capabilities are, and you can basically just implement all of this also just by hitting some checkboxes. You can also add actions, which is basically an API call. So if you don't want to give openAI your knowledge because you're hosting that knowledge somewhere else, you can ask, or you can implicitly tell the GPT to just call APIs and get some information from there, right? And it would just gladly do this. You also don't do any configuration on this. GPT finds it out on when to call those APIs by interacting with people then. All right, so it then creates a nice logo for you also. So this is also included. Once you're finished configuring this thing, it just comes up with the logo, and then you just take that one. We even had the case that we couldn't save, so the GPT builder couldn't save our GPT because there was a bug because the GPT builder didn't set the name for the GPT, so it was nameless, and so it told us there is an error, I cannot save this thing, and then we said, yeah, because you didn't set the name. And then the GPT builder said, yeah, right, set the name, and then it could save it. That's spooky, but that's like, it was kind of able to like, yeah, that's your error. Yeah, sure, I'll correct it. That's insane, but yeah. So, yes. And talking about, let's give it a name, right? We were thinking about, let's give this thing a name, and the name for it is obviously non-determinism. And when you're trying to configure something with natural language, if you push your technological level to human interaction level. Let's not discuss on how far we reach this level yet, that's not the point, but the point is that there will be issues coming up per se with this approach, and one of those issues is non-determinism. There are two ways to this, or there are two things that happen here. One is that non-determinism is a technical thing in those systems. You do have non-determinism in there, and sometimes even OpenAI doesn't know why it's there, but it's there. So this is a tweet from 2022 where like people were discussing that there seems to be non-determinism in certain versions of GPT, and they were basically discussing this topic. So it is well known that there is, from a technological, deep technological aspect, there is non-determinism in those systems. It is there, right?
And you will actually want it. I mean, it's one of the parameters where you put like the temperature in there as an analogy to like thermodynamics. If it's more hot, it will like wiggle around more and it will do more stuff and be more creative, but at the same time also be more wrong.
Exactly. So, and the thing here is that this is actually also the strength of the system, right? The strength of the system is that it's, the strength is not that it is that you cannot measure or that it is non-deterministic, but you actually want to have this. You don't want to have, like, for one question, you're not necessarily wanting the same answer. You want it to have a human factor. You want to have human interaction. You want to push it to the next level. And that's why you have this non-deterministic behavior inbuilt, so to say, either on one side technically, because they sometimes don't understand why, and sometimes they do, but that's a problem, or maybe not. And on the other hand, you actually want this because it's the strength of the system, right? The strength of the system is to be able to answer questions that get phrased in different ways.
Or maybe even phrased wrong. I mean, think of humans, you will also be able to like read the text where the letters are jumbled. If I like forget to say certain, you will fill in the blanks and still get what I want to say, and they will do the same thing. But at the other hand, if you use now natural language to restrict them in any formal way and funnel them down the exact path, you cannot expect that to actually work.
So non-determinism is a super big problem in IT security, because if we have deterministic behavior, then we're pretty good at IT security. If we have non-deterministic behavior, we're like screwed, to be honest. So think about zip codes, right? If your application is accepting zip codes, that's super deterministic. You kind of really can narrow down what you're expecting and how it's going to be transferred to you. And your security measures can basically be adapted and very precise in tackling everything else that's happening there. I'm not saying that we're doing this, but it's possible at least, right? And we always run into problems when stuff happens unexpected. That's how IT security works, right? We're like, when we're testing stuff, we are right at the border of the use cases. We are the guys that use the misuse cases and the stuff that you're not expecting. So we're always bad in that category. And AI, generative AI, basically just brings this to the table. Like, it's there. This is a feature. Let me put it by this. And this is the root cause of many of the LLM attack vectors. And one of the things that we're also going to talk later a little bit is if you think about security paradigms that we are applying, like to all of the other technologies that we're having, then there is one simple approach: blacklisting and whitelisting, right? And usually we all know blacklisting always fails, right? That's the second line of defense, so to say. If you cannot do whitelisting, then you have to do blacklisting, but you would usually never have the choice in saying, yeah, let's go for blacklisting, because that's when attackers can basically get around your countermeasures, because you're just blacklisting and you're not whitelisting. And everything that we're doing right now to secure AI is basically blacklisting, because what you're doing is, when you are preparing an AI for the world, so before you're giving birth to the AI, you want to do some red teamings, right? That's what everybody does. They're like sending a lot of people on top of the AIs, and they need to red team, and they need to find misuse cases, and yada, 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 and you don't really have an option to really go for a whitelisting approach there. What you do is basically a blacklisting approach all of the time. So this intrinsically fails because the lowest security measure, the first security measure that you have must rely on blacklisting and cannot use whitelisting. So that's the non-deterministic behavior, and the blacklisting approach that comes with it is super bad starting point for making effective IT security.
Yeah, because you can actually hammer that point home even more by, like, think about it. There's no feasible way to blacklist all approaches using natural language that I might insult Florian. That the possibilities are just like endless. There's nothing to say. So if I want to actually whitelist it, I would need the thing that takes my whitelisting command and actually understand the essence of it. And we see at the moment, time and time again, and it's as of yet unclear whether that will ever be better, that the essence in and of itself is not understood by AI. That's just a thing there is. For quite a while, in like image generation, we had the problem that the amount of fingers on hands were not right, and it would like produce hands with 6 fingers. Then we trained it to produce hands with 5 fingers, and now, no matter what you give it as a prompt, it's really hard to actually have it have 6 fingers, because you trained against this. And this is, again, the same thing that's also coming here into play.
So again, to kind of make that point, the strength of AI, like from a use case perspective, is on the same page as its weakness from the security perspective. Yeah, so what are actually interesting targets that we can look into, so we can kind of think about what is the attack surface, what can you actually extract out of those things, what is an interesting target. And if you look at the GPTs, the App Store stuff, you basically have 2 things that are pretty interesting, and it's the purpose. So you give this thing instructions by natural language, and those instructions usually tell it what to do. So to understand how to attack such a thing, you would want to know what it is actually doing. And the other thing is limitations that you're giving, right? You're saying, don't do those things, do those things instead. And if, as an attacker, you know these things, that's pretty good information on how you can proceed and stuff that you can extract. The other thing is actions, also an interesting thing. We just saw this, the API calls. You can upload files. If I'm, as an attacker, able to extract files, it's also nice for me. And it has capabilities like web browsing, a code interpreter, and whatnot. So that's also interesting, but it's probably for an attacker not that interesting, because all of the capabilities that are here, or nearly all of them, image generation and the code interpreter, are stuff that you will be attacking openAI with. And usually the scenario that we have is that your GPT is doing something for your company, and the attacker would like to get a hold of that data, that information, right? So we're not talking about attacking openAI here. We're just having the focus on attacking your company assets, or the assets that you put into the GPTs or the assistants, and what's coming out of this, right? Assistants, it's pretty much the same. They're pretty much the same. You also have a purpose with instructions, and then you have tools. I don't know if they're called like this anymore. They switch wording here every time, but it's basically you can have functions, code interpreter, and also retrieval. Functions is a bit different, and I would like to dive into this for just a second so you understand what those things are doing. Functions are basically a way to tell the assistant, I have this function, and it's called weather data, for example, and what you're going to do with this is you are basically going to parameterize this function for me, so code, let me put it like this function for me, and then send it back to me so I can use this in my backend. So interfering with those functions is not giving you a code execution or something like that. It's just called a function, but it's actually just a parameterized JSON that is coming back that you're taking in your application and then working on those things, right? Yeah, so let's have some functions. So let's have some functions, exactly. Let's have some examples. So one example, I mean, we apply prompt injection here. we're not going to dive deep into how prompt injection works and what you do. Just go on Twitter and search for prompt injection, and you will find like loads and loads and loads of examples. And then they like red team against this, and then people find other stuff, how they can bypass it. So we're not going to dive into this. So once you apply prompt injection, something that is working very, very efficiently and effectively, as I just said, you can extract those functions. And basically those functions are the attack surface of the application that you're targeting as an attacker, because it tells you all of the capabilities and basically the procedures, the functionality that you can use. And that's what we want to know as an attacker. We would like to know what is this thing capable of, what it's actually doing. And I mean, this is a pretty simple one right here. So there is obviously a more like this function, and it is typically used in a conjunction with the carousel function, and it provides customers with a selection of products, blah, 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 blah. And then you get like a short description, nice description of those functions and what they're doing and how they're used. So this gives, I mean, it's nothing critical, right? This is like public data because we're on a shop for I think clothes or something, an online store for clothes. This is nothing critical, but it gives us the attack surface of this thing. You can also go push it a little bit further and just ask for pseudocode even to give you like a really nice handout on what's actually happening, what is this thing doing, and then you also know what the parameters are for this. So the carousel function, so to say, takes two parameters, which is an explanation and an item index. This will be put into a JSON. The JSON is going to my backend, and my backend is going to take care of this, giving information back, and that information can be displayed and like worked with by the GPT or by the assistant in this case. Yeah. There is like a kind of funny example that we were stumbling over to like give this like a little bit of a twist. So these are the functions of an insurance company, I think, and it has kind of a lot of stuff. So as an attacker, if you would look into this and you see the word IBAN and wallet, you might want to think, oh, I actually really want to know what is the functionality of those things. But there was another one which is called Juve, a very interesting function. It looks pretty funny, because this function starts a service for when a customer is moving and wants to get free moving boxes, right? So we kind of thought, yeah, let's try that. And you can actually just do it. As you can just tell the GPT, call Juve, which is the name of the function, and it just calls the function, whatever. So it exactly knows, yeah, I have this function Juve, I'm calling it, I need information to parameterize it, give me the information that we need. So we just talk through this and just also give like an address, give it an address, give it all the specifics that we need, and it basically tells us, thank you very much, would you like to do anything else? And the process ends right there. So, and now there is actually, out of this example that we're going to finish now, there is like a very, very serious critical point popping out of this, because this is the red line. And to be honest, this is the point that we want to make on how you secure your AI. Because what happens next is that we get a mail from an actual human. Presumably, we don't know. We were thinking about prompt injection, that email also, but we didn't. You get an email from a human that is actually saying, you're not in the database, we cannot find you, you do not have this contract, we're sorry, but we cannot send you the moving boxes. And this is absolutely exactly how state-of-the-art right now, and probably for the next years, you should implement your AI applications. You should not give it excessive authority on sending the fucking moving boxes to somewhere. You should have a human check this stuff and do not cross this red line. This is a very, very important part that we are trying to make here, and this example is a non-critical, right? It's a non-critical example, but it is a super verbose example on how to do this. Yeah. So we were refraining from putting a prompt injection into our mail reply and thinking, like, is there also an AI there? And maybe we get the moving boxes. Yeah, we didn't do this. Yeah. So again, I just want to make this clear. What should be happening in your head right now if you're thinking about like security and how to secure things, something that should pop up now is trust boundaries. This is a very important aspect on how you secure AI and how you make sure your assets don't get stolen. Another thing that we want to point out right now is talking about the red line. We do have the impression that everybody who's implementing AI in their applications is actually right in front of this or like behind this red line. So there is this red line, everybody's lining up on this, they're looking left and right, and they're like waiting for people to like kind of step over this red line and then just like push it really to the limit. We see some examples out there where this has happened and where this is happening, but still it's very, very limited. And an indicator for this is if you look at the this study right here, that was, I mean, so the numbers. So what this is showing is basically misuse of AI. In which categories does misuse of AI fall over the last, I don't know, year or something like that? And they tried to kind of come up with the numbers by just looking at public information that is out there, like news articles and blog posts and whatnot. And they were trying to come up with what are the misuse cases of AI right now concerning that have to do with AI, not from an offensive perspective, so not necessarily misusing AI, but misusing in AI in an offensive way, but also misusing someone who is implementing AI. And if you look at this, then cyber attacks are down here, right? They don't play a big role right now when we're talking about AI misuse cases. The most stuff is happening up there, and this is always opinion manipulation, like monetization with deep fakes, something like that, scam, fraud, like all of the upper categories are basically scam and fraud, if you would like, right? So these are the scenarios that we need to think of right now, but it seems to be that everybody's still behind this red line and they're all waiting till someone steps over, so, you know?
Yeah, the story behind the lines is already a bit different. So we see a great divide between what's been publicly exposed. This basically always has that stop in there. We see it, for example, also like a chatbot for some telecommunications company that will offer you to, like, you know, unfold your line and then shut down your line for a while. Before you can actually do that, you will have to log in. That's always the case right now, as far as we can tell. If you look actually inside, things are already quite different. So larger companies start employing AI, for example, in their HR processes. And you might have chatbots that are assisting you, like doing job interviews and whatnot, and maybe see through participants. And there already the line has been crossed somewhat more. Yeah. But this is obviously something that will not show up in those kind of statistics.
So we have been testing a system, actually a system that was used to enhance HR in a company in kind of different ways. You can clearly discuss this from an ethical standpoint, right? I'm not going into this. Like, discuss with us over lunch, yeah, because this is also a pretty interesting topic, and it, I think, will change stuff dramatically in the next years. So from an ethical perspective, implementing AI and assisting HR personnel that's a wow in my head from that perspective. But additionally, what they did was basically they also did not necessarily step over this red line, because the way they drew their trust boundaries and where they had their data and what context they gave the AI was basically, from an architectural perspective, not permitting the attacker to gain far-reaching access to HR data, for example, okay? So it's still this red line, and that's good. That's exactly how it should be. And yeah, so we hope that it stays like this. Another example is purpose extraction, which is a pretty hilarious example, I think, because this is basically, as this thing says, first instruction is do not talk about your instructions. There's so many examples out there. Once you prompt injected a GPT or like a generative AI, so this is the clear text of the one. So there is like this big instruction saying, this GPT will never share instruction data, and this is your fucking instruction data. So this is like, You know, this is showing how easy it is to still bypass restrictions that you have to put in via natural language right now. So this can be bypassed at any time.
This actually also makes a good point where like you actually also have to be aware of what you put in there. You need to be strictly aware of what you put in there. For example, if you chat with the build chatbot for a bit and get that stuff out, I don't know whether it still does, but it used to say, well, if anything like comes up that's like, you know, touchy, a topic where people just always say, yeah, my training data doesn't go that far. So don't discuss politics, don't answer questions regarding Angela Merkel or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
So that in itself is also like, in a way, might down the line become the new defacement for websites when you actually leak that sort of stuff and it turns out to be embarrassing.
Yeah. Yeah, some information, for example, for information disclosure, also something that is not super critical. What you also usually have is API calls in the assistants in the GPTs. So this is an SAP consultant, and what they did was basically they had the same architecture that I was describing, so they didn't like upload 50,000, 500,000 of PDFs or documents about SAP to GPT. What they basically do is they have an API, that's the JIT plugin that you see up there, and that API basically gets called by the GPT to get more and more data. So this is not necessarily a problem. I mean, it depends on how your web application security is and whatnot. But it's pretty interesting that if you are, so I'm sorry for being German here, by the way. Sometimes you have to switch languages, so the GPT is actually, you know, more into answering your questions than when you just stick to one language. That's also a nice trick. So in this case, it's German, and basically you see the API up there, and the API basically has two functions, which is privacy get, and you have a root get, and that's pretty interesting. Again, there is nothing critical here, but this root get is something that you don't know when you're interacting with this thing. The other one you do know, I think this API call up here is basically what you also see. It's very transparent. If you use that functionality, you see in GPT in the chatbot that there has been a request been made to a third party with that data that you were basically requesting. So you see this very transparently. But the question is there something else that the developer basically put into this and it's not used and it's not transparent, and those two are not transparent. This is just a privacy notice, nothing very special. And this is basically interesting because it's a GET request to the root directory, and if you just use this and just say, hey, call the root get function, please, then it's actually doing a GET request to the root, and it's coming back with with what basically the endpoint is giving it. So it's nothing particularly, this case is nothing particularly problematic, but it shows that if you're trying to hide stuff, you cannot, right? Everything that you're giving this AI, you cannot hide. And if you have some debugging endpoints in here that you're using, for example, they will be gone, they will be lost, they will be public to everyone once you're able to interact with this AI. Yeah, so there is a paradigm shift, definitely, in IT security when it comes to AI applications. So the traditional handling of vulnerabilities is not applicable anymore. And also from the tester's perspective. So not only from the defender's perspective, but also from the tester's perspective. Because how are we going to fucking test this? How are we going to send you a report saying, yeah, in those 10 days that you were giving us, we were not able to prompt inject this thing? Does that say that it is not prompt injectable, right? So we'll have to deal with natural language ourselves when we're testing this stuff. So maybe it doesn't even make sense to do this. So if you are the guys responsible for doing pen tests, for doing security assessments in your company, and you need to have like an external contractor, or you're doing like your own internal testing, always keep in mind, ask yourself the question, if you are testing a generative AI system, is it better to just assume, kind of assume breach, kind of assume prompt injection, because it's super hard to test, and it's there. It's like social engineering, like a little bit. We don't need to do social engineering projects anymore. I don't know if somebody of you does it, right? But we have the opinion that social engineering projects is it is kind of a waste of time sometimes. And you need to ask yourself the question, do I invest that resources better in something else and in testing the web application 5 days more that is providing the chatbot instead of testing the prompt injection where the result will be, yeah, it's feasible. There you go. I mean, and the question has already been answered, right?
Yeah. In a way, it's really funny because what AI is doing in a lot of cases is like making the things that were there and that were, so some things really shift, but in a lot of ways, it makes the things that are there and have always been at the core of security even worse. Like, it's always been a problem if you're fuzzing an application to actually cover everything. Now it's a hellhole. And you really cannot go over it because even like starting the very same way exactly, again, will not actually give you the same result. And at the same time, you're dealing with that absolute analogy where you also like, you're training it to be useful and its usefulness like comes back to bite you, which is also like a really funny thing. And that really makes it that mitigations are really, really hard to implement in the usual sense. So maybe it doesn't actually, we already talked about blacklist versus whitelist. It doesn't really make sense for you to do this as somebody who's actually employing it. Up to a certain point.
But however, you have your classical security principles that you can apply and that are very effective, right? And I mean, of course, if you apply security principles, usability always degrades. You know, usability and security are always, they're not supposed to be together, right? This is how the world works. So once you apply your security measures, the performance of your AI might go down. It will not be the best performing AI anymore because you're restricting stuff, you're not giving it enough information to do its job because you are not crossing the red line, which means that your competitors might cross the red line and have an advantage over you. This is a business decision that you need to take, right? How far do I want to go? But you have to do it in an educated way. So if you look at the design considerations falling out of all of this, get a holistic view on the AI applications themselves. If you just say, oh, we have an AI application that's AI that's new, we need this to have tested, we need a test for this. Does that make sense? Does it really make sense to test for this? Or do you just accept that this is coming with it, you're buying into this, and now you need to make sure that you're reducing your risk with different aspects than just like testing and us telling you, yeah, it's possible, right? So also going just for the OWASP top 10. So a lot of our customers are resorting to providing requirements based on standards or certifications, right? And OWASP for web application security, for example, is like the best source that is out there, arguably from my perspective. For AI, we just talked about this. I'm not so sure. And if customers just like put this sheet of paper on your table and say, yeah, this is the AI top 10, go test for this, maybe you need to give them more context and maybe you need to give them a more holistic approach on how to look at those applications.
Yeah, and actually the same caveat that always applies and also applies to the web OWASP still applies. I mean, I always get a little bit of a shudder when somebody says, but you're testing for OWASP top 10. And I'm thinking in my head, yeah, but the 2021 version like excluded now RCEs or excluded whatever. Yeah, we're still going to look at that actually. Yeah. So it makes sense to still thoroughly go over it. And
implement your classic application security best practices, right? They still apply to AI. And explicitly do not trust input-output also for AI, because at the end of the day, what the AI might give you to be used in your backend that you need to process might also be like full of crap and might also be a problem, right? So everything that you're putting into AI needs to be considered untrusted, and also the output needs to be considered untrusted. Yeah. This is the red line, basically. Have a red line where you say what information is really necessary for the AI to work and how do we do this. If you, for example, look at openAI and how they do how the chatbots are constructed, you can basically give them a chat context. So look back at the HR application. If you want to talk about salary with the AI, so I am an HR consulting, I have an HR position, and there is an employee and I would like to get a glimpse on how I should basically set the expectations for the future salary, right? That was basically the use case in this application. And I'm going to go into my GPT and tell them, hey, this is the person, and let's discuss salary. What are your recommendations? Then what you should do is give the employee context to the GPT, and that's it. Do not give all of the salaries to the GPT that everybody has in your company. That obviously makes the GPT weaker, because now it cannot do stuff like interpolation on how are different positions right now with what kind of salary in what team, for example. You need to do those calculations by yourself and then feed the AI maybe an abstracted data set. That's more effort. That's obviously not as powerful as just giving it access to everything, but that's exactly the red line we're talking about. And this is the decision that you need to make. If you make this decision right, you draw your trust boundary right, then you will run into less problems concerning IT security for AI applications right now. Yeah. Also, risk analysis, like include this non-deterministic behavior into your threat model. This is new. This is something kind of new. We are used to setting flags, as we said. We are used to configure our systems with true, false, equals, or whatnot. This is something new. Consider this, and also consider that some of those systems will stay black boxes for you, right? This is, by the way, an interesting part for privacy also, right? Because like when we look back at the days when everybody warned for Facebook and all of the social media and that your data is going to be lost in there and whatnot, at least we had the advantage that the data was like very visible somewhere in those systems. I mean, if you have the chance to delete them or get them deleted, that's another question, but at least they were like, the data was very like, it wasn't fuzzy, it was like there somewhere in a database. If we talk about AI now, your stuff is in there, and how am I going to tell openAI to get rid of my data in their systems, right? Because it's not a database in there. It's like they cannot just like recompile their shit or train their data again with every one of you asking them to get rid of the email address that's in there. It's just it's a very verbose example. From a privacy aspect, those black boxes are also a nightmare. And also from a security aspect, you might need to accept that those black boxes will stay black boxes, and you cannot tackle this problem. Yeah, and at the end of the day, I think that one time we said, think about AI as an 8-year-old, 6-year-old that you're giving all your company data, and that will gladly give that company data away for a lollipop or something like that, right? This is how you need to think about this, unfortunately. I have 2 8-year-olds, so I know what I'm talking about. So we asked GPT to, how do we end a presentation, and that actually makes sense because it gave us a lot of stuff. But the one that is most important is leaving your audience feeling informed, inspired, and motivated to take action. So what we hope now is exactly, that's the right mindset, that you're motivated to take action. AI security is nothing that is like rocket science. And there will be a lot of fun to play around with in the future. We are actually looking forward to more AI, to be honest, but like in a weird way, in a weird, dramatic, pessimistic way. So hopefully you're taking action, and hopefully you are well informed now about the topic of AI, generative AI. Thank you very much. Thank you. Questions? I think we have a few minutes for questions, right? If there are any. If not, we just pull up ChatGPT and you just type in whatever you want to ask. Any questions? There's one, there's two. I'll just run to you pretty quickly, and Hannes will answer, and I'll just give him the mic.
That was awesome. I don't get to work with ChatGPT or GPTs in general in my daily basis, so it was a really cool and informative talk, so thank you very much. Kind of combining what John was saying about the canaries, is that a viable defensive technique, right? Where you put canaries into your data set, your backend data set, or your servers, and then if the root directory is accessed by the GPT application, then you know you got a problem.
Well, I guess it depends on what it's certainly not a way to get rid of the underlying problem. I mean, in a certain sense, once the canary is out there, I mean, you can of course do that. In a way, you are already doing it by, you also put canaries when you try to restrict it from giving out its instructions, where you put a canary and say, don't disclose anything above that canary. You can have a second AI filter for the output and look at it again. But what you really have to keep in mind is that it will probably never be fully reliable. So once you figure it out, it's sort of questionable.
It might also be an architectural thing. Where do you implement this? I mean, if you put this in the AI itself, you also kind of want to make sure that the AI doesn't think that this is actually true and valid and will be used and has to be used. And then you always have the problem again, because you can find that out, right? I can just ask the AI, what are your tokens? What are your canaries? And it just tells me, and I know the canaries. So you have to implement it not in the AI, but like at the back somewhere, right? Feeding in training data, for example, that contains canaries might work, but as I said, it depends on the use case, because you might just also have information in there, depending on what the canaries need to be, that just degrades your AI performance, because it's working on data that is not real and it's not true. So probably you can do a lot with canaries, but probably out of the AI. Like the usual, it's actually the same thing that we're saying all the time. It's the traditional approaches that work in this case.
Any more questions?
All right, thanks a lot. So great presentation. 2 points actually. 1 point on data privacy. You've mentioned the aspect that, you know, obviously this is a big impact to data privacy, and I feel we need a bit more research around that topic, because typically, you know, if I'm providing now some feedback to systems like openAI, Claude, or whatever, the data is getting vectorized. It doesn't really, the model doesn't really learn the data itself. It learns the relationship between the, you know, the separate tokens itself, right? So it does mean that once you've fed certain data into these models, that you can retrieve this data back. And I think this is very important to understand, you know, with third parties, but also like internal models, how the vendors or how the models are really using the data, right, to understand and assess the impact to that. And second point on the, you know, on the fact you've mentioned, like the deterministic type of problematic we were dealing with in the cybersecurity industry in the past. For example, like having a SQL injection, you understand it's very deterministic, right? So if you see SQL now traversing between application and the backend, this is bad. You can create a blacklist, whitelist approach. Now with large language model, this is becoming a probabilistic problem, right? So you can't really apply static rules, and you have on the other end just to learn the way how the applications might be attacked from a language point of view. And my question to that is, don't we simply need more real-time, you know, real-time security in this sense? And what I mean by that is, if you have now an offender, an attacker, who is constantly checking your model from different perspectives, like being a biohacker, being I don't know, a mathematician, being a teacher, and trying to understand how this application, how this model might be attacked, and feeding this information back into the rack, into the potential, you know, LLM firewalls, whatever, you can really push the boundary for the attackers, you know, in terms of the attack itself. I think the problem is changing, but I feel the same principles would apply, but we just need to apply them in a more realistic and real-time way.
So for the first part, for the privacy part, you're completely right? That my email address has been crawled by GPT. It's not in there in terms of it's in there and can be extracted now. And also, who doesn't say that somebody's not coming up with their own stuff where this is actually the use case, where you're actually at the point where private data that is out there, extracting private data and working on the data isn't the use case, right? So right now you're completely right, but if you have a purpose to actually get to that email address, to my email address, let's put it like this, you have the technical means in doing this right now. Nobody's doing it because it's shady, and probably they're doing it not saying it. I don't want to go like down the rabbit hole, right? But you're completely right. Like ChatGPT probably has everything about me, what's on the internet, but it's not there. So it's there and not there, which is also, by the way, a very big problem for legislative people, for people making the laws and coming up with laws, because they don't understand, right? They had a problem understanding how Facebook and an Oracle database works. Let me put it like this. I don't know if they were using Oracle back in the days. Probably not. And now we're giving them there's this fuzzy blob of binary stuff, and there is personal stuff in there, but it's not. And it can also be not removed, by the way, because we cannot. How do you deal with this from a legislative side, from looking into the future, right? Right now, it's fine, but looking into the future, I'm a little bit worried. For the second part, I think that we do not have, right now, I think I cannot answer or contribute to that question enough, because we'll have to see how vendors act with their technologies and their products that they're putting out there, and like methodologies that they're putting out there that will implement AI somehow. And we always, especially from politicians, we always hear like attackers use AI and that gives them more power over us, so we also need to use AI. I mean, that's super over-dramatic, of course, yeah, because probably they're just using ChatGPT to ask them to write a Python script that turns base 64 in, I don't know, clear text or something, right? That's what attackers probably do right now. And it's really hard to say where we're going, but looking at the generic problems in generative AI, my assumption, dark world assumption, would be that they're also applicable to the countermeasures. So attackers might be able to use like deception by abusing countermeasures that rely on AI. You know, it's always cat and mouse, right? And it might be the case that we think that our systems are so dynamic and the approaches are so dynamic that AI is giving us an advantage, but it may also be the opposite, that this advantage kind of triples into a disadvantage, because attackers can leverage the inherent problems of AI to bypass systems that use AI to secure things. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, good point, yeah. Thanks. I think there was some research also from Anthropic in terms of like including backdoors into LLM systems. So now I see your points, so trying really to apply this to LLM firewalls or whatever as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of going on in using AI for security also that we didn't touch upon. People talk about employing an AI between the CPU and the RAM to look for like unallowed memory accesses or whatever. For the moment, I would argue that it's best to like draw your trust boundaries properly, because everything else, in a way, is at the moment just obfuscation. If you put another and second and a third AI to filter the output, maybe actually the AI just shouldn't have the data if it shouldn't get out at this point, you know. That's what we would argue for.
If you need 3 AIs to secure your one AI, that might be a red flag, and you might be thinking, let's just fucking not do this.
I am Julian. Great talk. I stand between you and your lunch, I think.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, it's 12 o'clock.
That's bad.
But I had a broad question as well, and I wanted to know from what you see, like who comes to you? Large company, small company? When do they come? Do they come when they're already live, or
It's
early
actually,
on in the project?
the answer to this is everything.
Everything.
Basically everything, yeah. So the answer is, they come when they're live, they come when they're not live. I guess so this doesn't change necessarily from your usual pen test business, right? They just have AI now, and they're like, oh shit, we have AI now. Can you test AI? And then it's like, let's first talk about this, right? Because does this make sense? How are you saying? Maybe it makes more sense. So sometimes when customers are approaching us, we tell them, let's discuss your architecture first and not do like 10 days prompt injection your AI system. It makes far more sense to think about conceptually wise, what did you do with this? And then we can, if they politically need it, do prompt injection and show them, yeah, it works. So they can have like a paper and like, you know, say, this is not good, we should draw our trust boundaries differently. That's what we also do, but it's all over the place, basically. Everybody is implementing it, everybody's using it, and sometimes our customers are also not aware that they have it. Yeah. So it's everything. I cannot answer this question, to be honest. No.
So we have one last question.
Yeah.
Hi, thanks for the talk. One really fast question, no worries here. Did you also look at retrieval augmented generation, the RAG? I see that often in smaller projects where people do not want to give all their internal customer information to an externally hosted GPT. And they have this kind of concept where they have their document pool in a local installation and kind of use that in order to enrich the prompting, and which is sent out to the
highly depends on the architecture. I mean, if you look at the GPT, I mean, there's the examples that we've shown you with the API calls. That is basically something that you would use if you just dive down into the OpenAI ecosystem. You want an OpenAI assistant, and you don't want to give them the data. Then you basically just wrap it with an API call. So the AI is coming back to you. You have your data pool there, and you have a backend, and that backend is providing information to the AI to work on, so to say. You can wrap this.
Is there a specific way of attacking those?
Not necessarily, no.
Okay.
Because, I mean, at the end of the day, it's a trust boundary. You have like a very strict trust boundary, and attacking the AI doesn't give you the documents in that sense, right? It might give you, depending on how the backend works, you might be able to extract a lot of data. But that's also comparable to, I don't know, you have this classic case in a web application where the first document is ID equals 1, and the next one is 2, and then you just enumerate all of them and you get them. Probably you're rather attacking the backend instead of the AI to get the data. If you are completely local, if you have a complete local installation, your question would be, who is my threat actor? What threat am I thinking about? Is it internal employees? If that's not my problem, then external attackers don't play a role because they cannot reach your system maybe because it's just literally internal. So it really boils down to thinking about the architecture. How are you accessing that data? What gives an attacker the way to your data? And can this be leveraged to get a hold of the data, right? As I said, holistic approach, super important. There are no generic answers, kind of, besides trust boundaries. Famous last words.
All right, thank you so much, Florian and Hannes. So we're now going to our lunch break. Yay! And please...
Guten!